My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you're here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. When I was a little kid, somewhere in lower school, I don't know how old I must have been, first grade, kindergarten, don't quite remember. Those years are a little bit of a blur for me. But one image that I have very clear in my mind is from probably a biology class or natural science, one of these things where one of the experiments, I guess we can call it, that we did in class was that we got this jar, like this empty marmalade jar, glass jar, a see through, and we would put a lot of cotton inside, and then we would put in this cotton a little bean. And then you had to bring this home and you needed to take care of it. So every day, I think, you had to water this little bean that was lying on the cotton. And if you were careful and if you had prepared the experiment, it wasn't that complicated, but if you prepared it well enough and you watered it, then slowly you could see how this bean started putting out roots. And then from this bean would come a little plant. To be completely honest with you, I did not take a very good care of my poor little bean, and not much really came out of it. It pulled out some roots, but the plant, at least compared to my friends, my classmates' plants, was pretty sad. But some of my classmates actually took very good care of it, watered it when they needed to, and they had some pretty cool plants coming out of this jar. Well, this experiment, right, that we do as kids, Jesus Christ uses it to explain to us a little bit about our interior life. And he gives us this parable of the sower. He says, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came up and ate it. Some fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. It sprang up at once because the soil was not deep. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit, 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Our Lord's parables are beautiful, and they have such simplicity. It's so easy for us to imagine this sower, even if you've never, like me, seen an actual sower go out and sow his seed. It's easy to imagine the sower throwing out his seed. And then depending on where the seed falls and how well taken care of that piece of land is, how the quality of the soil is, how clean of rocks and thorns and obstacles that is, the seed would actually take root and give a lot of soil. Our Lord Jesus sometimes talks about the mustard seed, which is actually, for what people say, one of the tiniest seeds. And from that tiny seed comes up a pretty big tree. And this is exactly what we saw in my natural science class when I was a little kid. I mean, there were no like big trees because these were not mustard seeds, they were beans. And obviously, the condition of the jar didn't allow for such a big plant. But those kids who took good care of their bean and where all the conditions were met, the fruit was great and it looked beautiful. But if you didn't take care of it, if it wasn't well prepared, if you got distracted with something and stopped watering it, if the environment where it was placed, maybe you left it in the sun and then got scorched, then no fruit will come out of it, or very little, or very sad, like was my case. This is where the Lord is telling us, hey, I am going out there and I am sowing my seed. And Jesus Christ is constantly sowing his seed in our hearts. He's always showering us with graces, with blessings, with opportunities. And these blessings, these graces come in all sorts of ways and shapes, in all kinds of circumstances. Yeah, of course, when you go to Mass and you're listening to a good homily, or you are receiving Jesus in the Eucharist, when you're reading a good spiritual book, when you are listening to this podcast, for example, as you're driving in your car, and maybe a good idea kind of pops into your head. And maybe you make a good resolution. You say, you know what, that makes sense. That's something I could do. Well, that's a seed that Jesus is sowing in your heart. That's an idea that Jesus is putting in your heart. And these seeds can come in all sorts of ways and forms and shapes, because it can come also from uh, a piece of advice that your wife gave you, a correction that maybe your son or daughter made you, or something a friend said, something your teacher or your neighbor or your boss. If we are taking care of the soil of our heart, if we are constantly putting ourselves on the lookout and making ourselves open and available to what Jesus is trying to tell us, if we're constantly finding time for silence, for meditation, then those seeds that are constantly being sown in our hearts will be able to give fruit, because we will think about it, at that thing that came out in this class, this idea that the teacher brought up. I kind of bring it to my prayer and I think about it, and I keep watering it, right? Kind of thinking more about it, reading something. Maybe I go and look in the internet, or I find a good book that relates to that. And all of a sudden, our Lord is putting a very good idea in my heart. And maybe from that comes a change in life. But if I'm busy with music, if I'm busy with a video game, with the Instagram, with the emails and text messages, and I'm constantly running from one place to another, which can be the case for many of us, then maybe that seed is going to fall in our hearts and not give any fruit. Why? Because it's getting choked up by so many different things that I need to do. And I have no time to think about this great idea that came up in my class, or this correction that this person made me. Or maybe my heart is completely impermeable. Why? Because there's a mortal sin in my heart. And for that reason, I'm not able to receive sanctifying grace from Christ. Because all I can see in my memory and my imagination is that horrible thing that I watched on the internet the other day. And I'm stuck. That seed will just die and not give fruit. You and I need to take this seriously. Whoever has ears ought to hear, Jesus says. Well, hopefully you and I have ears. Hopefully you and I are listening to these words from our Lord and paying attention and making an effort to actually prepare our hearts. Jesus, I want you to sow good seed in my heart. Jesus, I want that seed to give hundredfold, to give big trees and fruits in my heart. I want you to change my life for the better. Help me with your grace to prepare that soil as best as I can, to really kind of pull out all the distractions, all the obstacles, whatever they are, and you are the one that knows that. Let's make that effort. It's worth it. Jesus will be able to prepare so many good seed for us and give us so much fruit if we let him. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help to put them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.